Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Fridays with Vistage webinar. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few items to help you participate in today's webinar. If you are experiencing technical difficulties joining the webinar, please dial support at 888-259-8414. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you'd like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. If you wish to ask a question, please type it into the questions pane. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. A recording of this presentation will be sent to attendees via email within the next week. I would now like to introduce the moderator for today's webinar, Ann Petrick, Senior Director of Research.
Thank you so much. As unemployment hovers near the lowest point in a decade, this tight labor market is making it really tough for companies to get qualified talent in the door. 57% of CEOs of small and mid-sized businesses say they're planning to expand their workforce in the next 12 months. Now that's just expansion. More of them are likely hiring to address the retention and churn they're experiencing in this tight labor market. And that's according to our most recent Vistage CEO Confidence Index survey. We know it's particularly challenging, so to win this war for talent, it'll take a powerful combination of both strategy and data. Today's webinar, Using Data versus Gut to Build a Winning Team, taps into recruiting lessons from Moneyball's Billy Beane. Today's presenter is Heather Hope, VP of Marketing at TalenTrust, and she'll be speaking on behalf of today's scheduled presenter, Kathleen Quinn-Vota. Heather's been with TalenTrust for over 7 years and works in concert with Kathleen to develop and promote much of the firm's thought leadership and resources for our Vistage members. TalenTrust is focused on human capital consulting and serves middle market companies across the United States. Heather, I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. And thanks, Anne, for the warm welcome. Yes, Kathleen Quinn-Vota, the CEO of TalenTrust and a Vistage speaker, was originally scheduled to present, and she had a schedule conflict. She's actually on a flight to visit her one and only son, a freshman in college, for Parents Weekend. So you all have me as her trusty second string. And actually, she sent a quick video. She wanted to, she recorded a video recording for me to share with you today in her absence. So you may want to turn up your volume of your audio because it does come through your speakers. So Kathleen is not just a baseball fan. Kathleen is a baseball fanatic. She travels to Arizona for Colorado Rockies spring training. She throws our annual company party at a stadium suite, and everyone comes in from across the country to enjoy a Rockies game here in Colorado. She is also, as I mentioned, a baseball mom who rarely misses a game, and she loves baseball. So for those of you who share her love of this sport, and for those of you who don't, there is still a lot to learn about running a business from baseball's Billy Beane. He's one of the most talented and winning sports executives. You may know of Billy Beane as the subject of the best-selling book and the Oscar-nominated movie Moneyball. The story unfolds his Moneyball philosophy, which is really based on using statistical analysis to pit his small market team against the big guys and to win. His major strategy is buying assets or players that are undervalued by other teams and then selling those assets or those players that are overvalued. Companies across the country have adopted his approach of leveraging data and using analytics as a way to really compete in the talent market and more effectively manage and assess their assets and their resources. Billy Beane spoke at a recent conference a few months ago, and our team at TalenTrust, Kathleen included, was really enthralled by his powerful insights on using data versus emotion to really create long-term success and profitability. We at TalenTrust are really strong advocates for data-driven talent acquisition. We think it's the best way to achieve more predictable results. So today we're going to talk through some of Billy Beane's wisdom as a backdrop and some of our experiential advice, and I'll offer you some ideas and some takeaways. Ultimately, I want to help ensure that you have a more consistent win in this fiercely competitive talent market. And Anne framed this issue in her introduction, and I do have a little bit more to add on that. I don't know if you've seen, but recently there was a Harvard Business Review issue that was dedicated entirely to talent, and it led with this quote: "Businesses have never done as much hiring as they do today. They've never spent as much money doing it, and they've never done a worse job of it." In baseball, to get back to this analogy, the batting average of 500 is amazing. It's actually astounding. The average in 2019 for a batting average for the major leagues was 253. Now compare that to most companies. Their recruiting processes are still hiring people who fail 50% of the time on average. And that is a terrible, dare I say, abysmal batting average for hiring. So we know that fundamentally this is not working for companies or for candidates. And so really it's time for a major shift in the recruiting paradigm. As Anne alluded to, talent is a significant issue. It remains the #1 decision that executives say they face, and it's an issue that really can limit your company's growth. At less than 4%, we're at our lowest unemployment rate since 1969, and we've really moved from a tough talent market to a true tipping point. As you've experienced in your companies, it's unfortunately become increasingly hard, time-consuming, and expensive to find the right people, just when you need them most. We see statistics that 75%, so 3 in 4, employees are either actively looking for a new job or are open to new opportunities. So while you are seeking new employees for new roles, your current employees may also be at risk, and it's something for you to factor. We also know that about 46% of US employers cannot find the skills that they need, and that's really a 12-year high for talent shortage globally. So a variety of industries, and you may be among them, are experiencing critical skills gaps. So as a result, we're seeing that both retention and recruiting are the most pressing talent issues that small and mid-sized companies face. So really, in order to win this war for talent, your people must become a strategic business imperative, and you must start relying on data to really inform those strategies. So back to our baseball fanatic, Kathleen. For every game, she gets her beer and her scorecard, and she counts balls and she counts strikes, and she tracks the game with numbers. It helps her focus. The same should apply to your business. I ask you today, what is on your people's scorecard? I'll give you some tips and some advice and things to think about, but consider this: measure what matters, because what matters gets measured. You may think this is people, it's soft and it's intangible, but as you learn today, you can gather so many data points to assess and enhance your people strategy. So it's really time that you start keeping score. Here's what Billy Beane had to say about baseball. They'd essentially been doing it the same way for decades before he radically changed it up. And I see quite a few parallels between the innovation that was needed at his tenure in baseball and the innovation that's really needed now in human resources. HR, the keeper of your most precious asset, your people at your company, has traditionally been seen as a cost center and as an afterthought. Its potential has been undervalued and underappreciated and essentially underutilized, creating an industry that's really ripe for disruption and change. So I would say that today, it's really nearly impossible to achieve your goals without the support of strategic HR initiatives. We're at a time where every organization's biggest challenge is finding and keeping top talent. So if you don't already have an outstanding CHR, I suggest that you get one. Having a talented and strategic HR leader on your team or as an outside advisor will help you have a competitive edge in both winning and retaining the best people. And you really can't grow your business without this strategic insight. Here's another thing that Billy said, specifically about being a David in a world of Goliaths. And I think this really relates to all of the positions that we're in the small and mid-sized business space. We know that middle market companies can't compete with the Yankees either. Corporations have big budgets to throw at the talent market. They can offer things like higher compensation, better perks, greater marketing research, and they have widely recognized brands and reputations that these smaller companies that are in the Vistage community really can't touch. So rather than settle for second best when it comes to talent, we encourage that middle market companies should really develop an intentional culture that offers a really unique experience. Maybe it's more personal, maybe it's more flexible, maybe it's closer to your company purpose. These are the things that candidates and employees are really looking for. So understand what they want and find a way to provide it in a way that really makes you stand out. We know that great cultures are ultimately not based on money. So you can do and offer something that money can't buy with an outstanding culture. So I encourage you, we'll get a little bit more into this today, but I encourage you to do some market research on candidates and employees, the same way that you do on your customers and your clients. What do they want? What can you offer them that is most appealing? Today's workforce primarily wants culture first, then they want leadership, and they want growth opportunities. So if you can focus and hone in on those three things, fantastic culture, amazing inspirational visionary leadership, and true growth opportunities, that's really a way to distinguish yourself and be a fantastic David in a world of Goliaths and compete with those big guys. There are several key challenges and a number of really great opportunities that come with being in this SMB space. And the National Center for the Middle Market has released a report specifically on the human capital at organizations of your size. So I hope that you'll follow up with me after today's webinar or take a look at our website for that report, because it gives additional actionable advice beyond what I'm going to talk to you today about the data. So getting back to the data, Billy was about trusting the numbers over what he saw with his own eyes. He really felt that data, not emotion, is the lifeblood. So it's really rare, and we've been consulting in this space for about 15, 16 years. It's rare to find an SMB that carefully measures the results of their recruiting practices. So here are some examples of the data that you might want to consider. How many people did you hire, externally versus internally? Who stays the longest and performs the best? What's your average cost per hire? What's your average time to hire? What sources produce the best candidates? What marketing tactics are most successful in attracting candidates? Which assessments provide the most accurate and useful information? Are you winning great candidates who then go on to become great employees? Yes, I would argue that measuring can be hard, but you can start by focusing on some of the easiest things to measure, like absentee rates, results of performance reviews, retention and attrition rates, and then you can branch out from there. So start with this question: how do we know whether our practices lead to the best employees? How do we know that our practices get us the people with the most talent and the right cultural fit? Ultimately, the ones who will help you reach your competitive potential. For that, you need a process, and you must measure that process to truly understand what's working or what's not. Measuring is the only tool that enables you to influence the outcomes, either positive or negative. And without that information, without that data, you're truly moving blind. So the way to find the best and the brightest people that you need to grow is to search for candidates in the same way that you do profitable customers. Ultimately, recruiting is a sales process. And if you've read any of our content we've contributed to Vistage over the years or seen any of our webinars, you understand that this is a drum that we continue to beat. Recruitment is a sales process. It requires strategy and resources. And like in sales, part of your strategy is really building a pipeline of people with the right talent and the right cultural fit who are available to you when you need them versus when you're in a crisis situation. And you also need to consider succession planning for current employees. They're counting on professional advancement and opportunity in order to stay with you. So who can come up in the ranks behind them and fill their roles? A pipeline and a succession plan will really ensure that you never have to fill a position with the second best talent. Billy Beane says you have to have both a seatbelt and suspenders for support, and we would agree with that wholeheartedly. So the secret to a successful recruitment is to maintain a sales mindset. Our advice always begins with treat candidates as you do customers. You have probably figured this out, how you develop a pipeline of customers or clients and how you market to them to ultimately get them to become a partner for you. So we want to advise you and talk you through data points today and the steps in that process to do that from a candidate and an employee standpoint. If you do that, you will be among the small minority of companies that really track and monitor whether their hiring practices are working, which will really put you way ahead in the talent war. So ultimately, recruitment is a sales process. And to further illustrate this, here are the steps in the process. We use a graphic that is similar to the sales funnel that you see, very common. And it really starts at the top with employment branding, your reputation as an employer. And then it stops with the offer to a candidate. But in reality, we all know this, it doesn't really end there. It continues into the employee lifecycle with onboarding, training and development, retention and engagement. So I'll cover that in a moment, but first I'm going to focus on this idea of recruitment as a sales process. Now, I'm not going to focus on the steps in the process. That really is covered in another webinar, and at TalenTrust, we'd be happy to walk you through this. Instead, I'm going to focus on the questions that you should ask and the data that you can and should gather at each of these stages in the process. So we'll start at the top with employment brand. So what is your reputation as an employer? How are your ratings and your reviews on Glassdoor or on other social media platforms? What do your employees tell you? Do you use tools like Gallup Q12 to measure employee engagement? Or do you use tools like TinyPulse to do pulse surveys? Or the Net Promoter Score? You're probably familiar with the Net Promoter Score, which asks your clients how likely they are to recommend working with you. But the Net Promoter Score asks your employees on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend employment here to a friend or a peer? So that's an incredibly valuable piece of information to gather from your current workforce to understand their engagement levels and their interest in promoting you or recommending you as an employer. So do your current employees refer their peers to work for you? And are those referrals quality? How do you stack up when you look outside of your organization to competitors, either in your region or in your industry? What are your compensation levels or your perks or the things that you offer, your culture? Are they trending with market expectations? We know that 75% of job seekers now research a company's reputation and employment brand before they apply. And we know that half of job seekers cite culture as very important in applying to a company. In fact, 32% are willing to take a 10% pay cut for better culture. 1 in 3 willing to take a 10% pay cut for better culture. So we know that culture is really critical. It's cornerstone, and it permeates every workplace, but it's really invisible if you don't pay attention to it. So becoming a best employee is not going to best employer or best workplace is not going to happen by default. You have to really make it happen based on your particular mix of values and beliefs and standards. So this is important because understanding who you are and why you do what you do enables you to really leverage your culture into an employment brand. It sets the stage for everything else you do in this sales process, and it gives you a talent advantage. And we know that this tight job market, as we look ahead into the coming years, is not going to change. But your culture might honestly need an upgrade in order to really compete. So take a look and consider what data you can measure about your culture to know, do you need to upgrade your culture, or do you need to just better leverage your culture in using it in this sales process? Next, I'm going to talk about this second level, which is lead generation. How are you finding the leads and the people to hire? Is it a mix of internal promotions and external hires? What's that mix look like? We see that openings are now filled more often by hiring from outside than promoting from within. After World War II through the 1970s, 90% of positions were filled internally, and that has really changed dramatically. Now that figure is 1/3 or less. So there's two sides to this. When you hire from the outside, you don't have to pay for training and development. But these experienced people are much harder to find. So consider the training and development that you're willing to offer as an employer. And consider whether you're willing to offer that to candidates and or to the people that are already on your team. We know that professional growth and promotion are among the top want-to-haves for young people. So back to lead generation. What are the most effective methods for you to target passive candidates that are outside your organization? Last year, the majority of people who changed jobs were not searching for one, according to the Harvard Business Review. Companies instead reached out and pulled these highly valued passive candidates in before they even thought about checking ads. So think about how you are targeting passive candidates. Those are the people that are at other organizations doing great work. They have a tremendous skill set, but they're heads down, succeeding in other roles, and you have to aggressively pursue them. Keep in mind as well that recruiting is now 90% candidate driven. That means that you don't pick talent anymore. They pick you. And 83% of employers say that their employment brand really plays a significant role in their ability to hire talent and in that ability to generate leads. So next I'll talk about candidate engagement. So where are your best candidates coming from? To my earlier point, are they active, looking for jobs, or are they passive, not looking but open to opportunities? How many of your candidates are referred by your employees? What's the conversion rate of candidates to hire? And what's the quality of candidates that you attract? Are you creating the right pool of candidates and moving the right percentage into the interview stage? Where are they dropping off? What schools or other resources are providing the best performing candidates? Again, related to candidate engagement and providing an experience that really is engaging for candidates and sells them on the opportunity at your organization. How many steps are involved in your hiring process? Do you communicate during that process to keep candidates informed and engaged? And how many candidates do you lose at certain points in the hiring process? Where and why? Next, I'll talk about candidate screening and candidate assessments, and also ultimately candidate selection with interviews. Are your hiring managers trained to know what good looks like? What consistent data points do they use to make the right decision and to compare across multiple candidates to inform their decisions? Are they using behavioral-based interview questions? Are they looking for work product examples? Are they using assessment results? Are they comparing multiple candidates or just looking at one candidate in isolation? The data doesn't matter if they can't compare the data across multiple individuals. How are you using data to assess cultural fit? The number one criterion that companies use is looking for cultural fit. So are you doing that with interviews, with assessments? And then are you using tools that provide both qualitative and quantitative information about candidates? How successful are the tools at predicting good hires, looking at skills, attitude, and cultural fit? And also, are you using assessments to benchmark against your top performers and your cultural ambassadors, those that are really succeeding and doing amazing things at your organization, so that you can compare those with the candidates that you're looking at? And then finally, for candidate offer, how much time and money did you ultimately spend for each hire? What are you investing in the hiring process, from initial outreach to interviews to background checks to pre-offer to offer and hire to start date? What are you investing in terms of time and money? Is it enough? Are you wasting too much money or too much time on practices or on resources that are not ultimately driving the results that you desire? And is it not working for you, or what is working? In addition to looking at time and money spent on the hire, take a look at the time to hire. How long does it take to fill your open positions? Are there any delays that could be avoided? What is it costing your business in terms of missed sales, lost customers, the inability to move your strategic objectives forward, or even employee attrition or burnout because they're overworked while you work to fill open positions? Time to hire is an interesting data point, and it can help you assess where there might be lags or issues in your process. And then after you hire, what about turnover? What are your turnover rates? At what points? At 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, and then beyond? And how do those compare to others in your location or in your industry? Do you conduct exit interviews with employees to understand why they're leaving? Do you check in with employees regularly who are with you to understand what they like and what they don't like about working for you so that you can act on some of their suggestions? So this is a lot, obviously. Recruitment is a full and extensive sales process, just like sales and marketing for your clients at your company. So where do you start with this? You'll find the answers in the data through a combination of surveys, through interviews, through assessments, through the tracking software that you likely use to track your candidates. And it's really important that you look at ultimately what is true success and how do you measure it. It's measured in candidate quality, it's measured in your cost to acquire new talent, and it's measured in conversions to long-term employee and getting beyond those the attrition that often occurs in the first few months after hire. So understanding how your practices impact the quality of your hires is also among one of the most consequential aspects of business today. Again, to my earlier point, we manage what we measure. So I also want to say that it's important that we pay attention to both skills and attitude, experience and cultural fit, character and personality. So this is a well-defined hiring process. It's based on data, and then it's punctuated with personal observation, which helps select the right people. Because ultimately, these are people. There's soft skills and hard skills and personality traits. And it's about the human component that comes into your work environment. So it really is that mix of data and personal. So for another baseball analogy, I'd like to ask you, what are you doing across the full employee life cycle to make sure that your team members, the people on your team, become raving fans? The kind who want to get more and more involved. The kind that will boast about you and talk about their experience online, bringing other people to your organization. The kind that will wear your jersey or your logo with pride. So think about the full employee life cycle. And what are you doing where you invest in employees and then measure their output, and where you can really think about where you can drive fanaticism. So it really starts at the top with the employment brand and candidate attraction. Then it shifts to candidate engagement and screening and selection. And then from there, it shifts to hiring these folks and what you do during new hire welcome and orientation, and then what you offer in training and development to retain them and engage them. And then that leads back into your brand and your culture that then further drives candidate attraction. So you can see this cycle, this circular effect here of everything being interconnected in the employee life cycle. So I would challenge you to think a little bit about the 5 elements of this cycle for employees and where you can really drive results and fanaticism among your employees. It will create the momentum that you need to really continue to find the right people and keep the right people to attain your growth and your business objectives. So here's an example for me. I work for TalenTrust, and it's an amazing organization. And I have been with the company for 6 or 7 years, and they are incredibly sensitive to my personal needs. And it really boils down to the culture that our CEO has created. So I am a raving fan, and I am loyal through and through. Personally, I am going through a crazy time where I'm moving, just in the neighborhood, not across the country, but I'm moving. And it's the worst time to be moving based on everything that we have going on at our company. But it's the best place to be because my peers and my coworkers, my colleagues have offered nothing but the best reaction and support. Everyone is aware that I'm juggling this internal responsibilities with external demands, and we have a culture to this top point of this visual that is really rooted in supporting and encouraging one another, and it affects our employment brand, and then it affects everything in the employee life cycle. So it's what keeps me engaged and keeps me retained moving forward and telling people more about it and becoming a raving fan. So please consider the full employee life cycle. I know the emphasis today was really about using data in candidate selection and in your candidate selection process, but think about all of the ways in which you can collect data on employees at all these points in the employee life cycle, and then use that data to fine tune what your strategies are for recruitment and retention. Because we know that essentially retention and recruitment are playing equal billing at the top of the list of priorities as it relates to talent. So again, this is another quote from Billy Beane where he's talking about meritocracy and the importance of promoting and hiring the best and the brightest. And so the data and some of the data points that I've emphasized really help you to do just that. And I have an example of that that's played out for TalenTrust. We have many clients around the country, and several years ago, we had a payment services company that was a client of ours, and they were based in Colorado. And they were acquired by private equity, and they had a ton of new resources, and they were looking to scale really aggressively. And the new owners of the team versus the team playing on the playing field were playing a very different game. So they came to us. They needed to hire a crazy number of people to really drive this growth. And their requirements, their key performance indicators for the roles they were looking to fill were basically, do you fly fish? Do you climb? Do you bike or ski? Will you enjoy living and working in Colorado? We'd love to have you on our team. And ultimately, that lack of data and insight used in the hiring process was going to create a really homogeneous workforce. And they were not seeking the skills that they needed to drive 3 to 5 years of really aggressive growth that their investors expected. So we really looked at it with data and information in mind. We developed job descriptions that were very specific and drove very, very tangible KPIs, key performance indicators. We went into a proactive sourcing mode to really seek out the people with the pedigree from an academic standpoint and from a professional standpoint that would drive that growth. We were looking for people with the right attitudes, beliefs, skills, and experience. We used assessments to look at the people on their team that were performing at a high level, and then compared that with the candidates that we were seeking on their behalf to make sure that they had the right attitude, aptitude, and intellect, and the right abilities to really succeed in the roles that they were looking to fill. And then we made sure that their hiring managers used the behavioral-based interview questions to truly ask the questions and dig into and get more insight into what they were looking for in the interviews. And we challenged them to ensure that they were never looking at a candidate in isolation and looking at one person and the data set for that person. They were looking at 3 to 5 of the top candidates and all of the data they had on that candidate to make the decision that was the best for the company. So that's an example of really how this can play out for a company. So here's another quote from Billy Beane. Despite considering data over emotion as a best practice, sometimes you just hire the wrong person. And so what do you do? Sometimes it's usually based on bad attitude versus a lack of skills. So our philosophy on that is when a person with the right attitude, the right values, and the right cultural fit walks into your door, hire him or her with lightning speed, and then allow them the time they need to learn the necessary skills to really succeed in your organization. And then on the flip side, when you see an employee that's blaming others, that's making excuses, that's being disrespectful, fire that person with equal speed and take whatever time is necessary to replace them with the right person. If you are following this methodology and you're collecting points of data and you are following a process that treats recruitment as a sales process, you will be fine with eliminating and terminating that toxic person, and looking back to your pipeline of candidates and selecting a better person for your organization. It really does come down to data and process. So ultimately, in his 2 decades so far of leading the Oakland A's, Billy Beane took his team from being one of the worst on the field to making it to the postseason 8 times. So although the A's still have a lot of ups and downs, Beane's database management has really revolutionized baseball, and it's really a model for building winning teams everywhere. I hope you can see how it applies to your organization as well. We will go to Q&A in just a moment, but I did want to encourage you to text on your phone the word people puzzle without a space in it, people puzzle, to the number 44222, because I'd like to get you a copy of our hiring guide. I'd like to get you the National Center for the Middle Market report that's specific to hiring for middle market companies, and get you the resources that you need and the answers to the questions that we don't get to cover today. It has been a pleasure to talk through this, and I'm even more excited to switch to Q&A, so I'll pass it back to Anne.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. I really liked the idea you shared at the beginning of having a beer while you're gathering the data points for your team. I'm not sure if that's what you're recommending, but that sounds very appealing to me on this Friday. So with that, there's a lot of things that you talked about, data that you can gather, and cultural fit and job fit. What do you think the 3 most critical points of data that you might recommend to assess hires if someone's starting from scratch?
Sure. So I would say if you're looking at assessing the hires that you're making, the first step is really formulating a KPI, those key performance indicators. That then leads into your job description, but it's what you're measuring your candidates against, right? It's how you know what good looks like. So that's your baseline. Then the next key piece of data is that assessment. It could be predictive index, it could be profiles XT. There are lots of assessments out there. We encourage you to pick one and to use it consistently. Use it to benchmark the people who are already on your team doing great work, and then use it to assess multiple candidates. And then I think the third piece of data, so you have your KPI, you have your assessment information. The third piece of data is behavioral-based interview questions. So this is where you can get a little bit more into that soft area related to attitude and related to culture and core values. So if your core value is integrity at your organization, and you are interviewing for that consistently all across the board, every hiring manager needs to be asking the same question of every candidate to get to that root question of your core values. And so they need to be asking, tell me about a time that you have exhibited integrity, either personally or professionally, and talk to me about that. So those behavioral-based interview questions that really get to the root of it, really get to the meat of it, asked consistently across the board, are really important.
Great, I would agree with that. At a recent Vistage event, one of the members who was recognized said that it was more about culture than performance, and he talked about having to make some really hard decisions about letting go someone who was a top performer because they just weren't the cultural fit. So I'm curious about how do you actually quantitatively measure for culture?
Yeah, so you can understand your culture first and foremost before you want to look at a candidate and whether they fit your culture. So talking to your employees that are at your organization about what makes them come to work every day and what makes them want to contribute and what would push them to leave, and understanding the values and how they are exhibited in your organization is paramount. So culture is really like air. You don't even notice it until it's not there. You don't notice your own company culture until you leave and you go to another culture. It's kind of like, we've always done it this way. This is how we are. So you have to ask people new on your team, people who've been with you for a long time. You have to ask external people as well, your clients, your partners, about your culture to get an understanding of what it is that you truly are culturally. And then from there, then you can really use the assessments and use the behavioral-based interview questions to understand if somebody's going to be a fit for your culture. You know, if you are a very aggressive culture, you can be interviewing for that. If you are a play to win, win at all costs, very competitive, and companies are like that, successful companies are like that, you need to understand that that's how you are and utilize that information in assessing candidates. If you are a culture that is very historical and you're an older company with very historical roots, and you have very strong traditions in the way that you behave, you need to understand that so that you can convey that to people and they can know to opt in or opt out. So you're really trying to get to that root of that cultural fit. And culture trumps everything, Anne. If somebody's not the right cultural fit, they can be toxic, and to your worst case scenario, they can be toxic to your environment. They can be a cancer. Best case scenario, they're like a square peg in a round hole, and they're like fighting an uphill battle. They're not able to work at their best and be in their best. Your culture is not bringing the best out in them, and vice versa. So culture is so much more important than skills. Skills you can train, but attitude and culture are really cornerstone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it was a great question. And that that member was talking about the context of a top performing salesperson, which is a good segue to a question we had about using data and selection, but specifically for sales teams. So I love the idea about benchmarking top performers and then being able to, benchmark candidates about that. But is there anything different for sales?
It's so interesting. That is a lot of the work that we do at TalenTrust. Salespeople are tricky. They're tricky because they can sell themselves. If they were any good at what they did, they would be selling you themselves in the interview. So you have to really cut through that, and you have to ignore the gut reaction that you have to them and get to that data. So yeah, I mean, I would say that looking at who in your organization is a top performer in that sales realm, assessing them to benchmark against them, a lot of assessments will let you look outside of your organization, to others in the field or the industry or in that role, and get benchmarking assessments for the role. So you want to really use benchmark information from assessments, and then getting to the meat of it by asking those behavioral based interview questions is critical. Asking for work product is also critical.
Great. So I'm going to ask a tricky question because I do have a background in talent analytics. I definitely love the idea about benchmarking and assessing top candidates. But in my prior life, another recommendation that a practice that we did is actually also assessing the lowest performers, so you can really isolate the characteristics of those that are successful, because sometimes they might have some of the same traits, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
That is a great idea. Yes, I mean, we are huge believers in data and assessment. So when we go work with a client, we typically assess everybody in their workforce because it just is more information. So then you can absolutely hone in on what you want and what you don't want. I think that's a fantastic idea. Absolutely. Sometimes you get to what you want by understanding what you don't want.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to switch a little bit, gears a little bit here about talking about the lead generation. And I love the idea of the fact that human resources is now more of almost a sales function. So talk about how that's changing the kinds of skills you need in your HR team or your HR leader.
Oh yeah, it's so pivotal right now. The HR leader needs to really have a strategic mindset. They need a seat at the table to really drive the people and the talent and the culture strategy. So I think that's a key thing. Whether it's, depending on the size of your business, it might be a CHRO who is internal, or it might be an outside advisor who really understands the nuances and how dramatically the industry is shifting, because you need to have insight into the organization and where you're headed and the information that you can glean from inside the organization, but you have to mesh that with what you have as far as information outside of the organization. What's happening in the market? What is happening in terms of trends? Where are there talent gaps? Where are there opportunities to align with partners to address those talent gaps? What does the workforce of the future want that today's workforce didn't want? So that visionary, forward-thinking, strategic mindset at the table in that HR role is critical. And then in the past, HR often evolved out of policy, procedure, legal. It was your comp, your benefits. It was, the things to make your workforce work inside your organization, but it didn't tap into the cultural element, and it certainly didn't tap into the sales and marketing component. Now more than ever, you need somebody on your HR team who wants to treat recruitment as a sales process, who wants to understand what candidates want and wants to understand what your employment brand is, how it could be improved, and how to really leverage that brand to be really attractive to candidates. It is no longer what we call a post and pray environment where you find out from the hiring manager what they're looking for, you post it up online or on your job board, and you pray that somebody comes and finds you. It is night and day compared to that. It is a really, in the same way that you sell to your clients, you really have to think about how you promote your employment brand to the candidates you're trying to seek and how you develop it further for the people that are on your team already to keep them on your team. So it's a very different mindset. It is truly a communication, culture, collaboration, marketing, and sales mindset that's strategic in thinking about this. Yeah, very different. Good question.
Yeah, and it's part of our presentations. We talk about the fact that there a lot of times when you talk about who's your competition in business, it's all about market share and competitors and share of wallet. But I really think that the share of talent is something that most organizations, it's probably their biggest challenge, right? Biggest threat to growth.
Yeah, who is your competition? It might not be, if you're making widgets, it's not the guy down the street who's making widgets. It's the guy down the street who could hire your people away to make the widgets.
Exactly.
It's really, we've done a webinar previously on the importance of HR being strategic and what that looks like. I know Vistage has also been talking about that for quite a while from their research. And so I think it's pivotal that people really, and we speak to it in our hiring guide, but yes, like what does strategic HR look like? How do you take the big data? How do you take the visionary mindset that's needed? How do you make that work for an organization of your size? Good question.
Yeah, great. So let's get back to some data and measuring some of the things and engagement. And we did ask in our research about some of the how our members are currently measuring engagement. And by far, the top tactic that was used was one-to-ones, which I thought was fascinating because that's great to collect some more qualitative or anecdotal information. But it's really hard to aggregate that across an organization to, across departments even to understand that. So can you tell us a little bit more about other more formalized measures of engagement and what's the easiest if you were going to move away from like that one-to-one to a more quantitative measure, how to get started?
Yeah. So first of all, I love that companies are having that one-to-one and are having that dialogue around what are you enjoying about working here? What is challenging? What would we need to do to keep you? Where are you at in your employment experience? So I love to hear that managers are talking to their team members about that. So that's fantastic. Then I think the other thing is people are only going to say so much in person to the person who manages them. So you need to have the ability to collect information on engagement that is in more of a formal and confidential manner. So I recommend an outside third party to do research and research with your employees, to do surveys. So that could be as simple as something that's called Tiny Pulse, and it's an online technology where it can shoot out 2 to 3 questions a week. You can control the pace and the questions. They also suggest questions, but it's a pulsing survey to ask your workforce about questions about their experience and their engagement levels at your company. And that gathers all the information, and it's completely confidential. It's also a really nice tool that enables your employees to give shout outs and kudos and recognition to each other as well. So there's a couple of elements that are really great about that platform, but one of them is this pulsing of gathering this information across your full workforce on a regular basis. So I'd say that's one thing. Then another outside recommendation would be to do the Gallup Q12. So the Gallup is a well-known surveying organization. They came up with the 12 most important questions to ask your workforce to gauge engagement. And then you can take that information to understand what you need to do to improve those engagement levels. And so having an outside firm do that research so that they're asking the questions of your workforce, but it's being gathered in a highly confidential manner and aggregated, and it's very anonymous, is critical. People will speak up and they will tell you what's on their mind. They will tell you what their concerns are, but they need to trust, A, number one, that it's confidential, and B, number two, that you are going to do something with it. So if you gather this information through Tiny Pulse or through an outside entity or a technology, you have to assure them that it's confidential and that you're going to do something. The other tool that I would recommend considering, if you want to ask just one question and have it be just one question, it's the Net Promoter Score. It's the same question you ask your clients. It's a Harvard Business Review best practice to ask how likely is it that you would recommend us to a peer or a colleague. And you can do the same thing as I noted in the webinar, but just ask it of your employees about whether they would recommend the employee experience and their employment experience and the company as an employer. So those are a couple of suggestions and tools to consider in asking and really assessing engagement. I think the manager one-to-one conversations is great. I think you could take the information you glean and you could form some tiger teams internally to address the issues that come up. You could really get further insight from people, both quantitatively and qualitatively, in follow-up to what you gather confidentially.
Great. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I think, the takeaway I have there is that you don't have to come up with all the work of coming up with the questions to determine is that a lot of, that work's been done, and it's a matter of the right timing of how to deploy that.
Totally. Why reinvent the wheel? Harvard Business Review and the Net Promoter Score is fantastic. It's a phrase statement, and you can do that using a SurveyMonkey tool. You can also ask the Gallup Q12. That's a very commonly used best practice. And then with the pulsing and the Tiny Pulse surveys, what I like about it is continuity and consistency. Nobody wants to be asked just once a year in an annual review how they feel about their experience. They're coming to you and working for you almost every day, right? So one time a year doesn't cut it. It needs to be done on a regular basis.
Great. A very good cadence there. When we talked about the understanding what employees like and capturing that, one of the data points that we've captured is that employee referrals are actually the most effective tool for acquiring new talent.
Yes.
And so, that's something that you talked about too as part of the funnel, and that's definitely feeds into the idea of lead generation. But do you have any recommendations for how to formalize an employee referral program? It's one thing to say that that's the best source, but there's a lot of components that go into creating that program.
Yeah, so really good question, because referrals are key. They will cut your costs down to go out and pursue candidates if you have your employees instead talking to their peers and bringing people into you. So it is a very effective way to build your pipeline of candidates and potential hires. It speaks to your employment brand, right? So you have to have an awesome culture and you have to have raving fans in order to drive those referrals. So it happens organically, but then you need to have systems and processes that support that. Okay, so the culture and their experience is root to this, and it's foundational. But then once an employee gives a referral, you have to have a system and a process to thank that employee for the referral, and then to have communication with that referral through the candidate pipeline and your candidate engagement with them, and be communicative about where they are in the pipeline. You need to have the ability to assess that candidate in the same way you assess all the candidates, so they're not weighted unfairly just because they did come in as a referral. So that goes back to that point about data and the data you collect on candidates and the comparisons that you make. You need to incent your employees and get back to them not only for bringing referrals in. A lot of companies offer financial incentive. If you look at the cost to recruit and you look at the cost to your company of open positions, you probably want to consider giving a referral bonus for people who bring candidates to you, and it should be more than $50, right? You also need to consider a higher bonus to people once their candidate makes it all the way through the process, is hired, and then a bonus once that person is retained for 3, 6, 9 months, a year, etc. Because there is a tremendous value to that referral. You also want to make sure at the front end that you're giving your employees the ammunition that they need to make those referrals. So do employees know what you're looking for right now, what your open positions are? Do they know how much you value the referrals, what you'll give to them as a thank you for the referrals? Do they know how to talk about your company and about the culture and about the opportunities? So I think there's a lot that can go into a referral program, and they're really critical. So great question.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're about out of time. So thank you so much, Heather. I probably could talk to you all day about this. So really appreciate you sharing your expertise. And just to remind those attendees, thank you for attending. And we invite you to join one of our upcoming webinars. In 2 weeks, on October 4th, Tom Young's presentation, Put Your Website and Digital Marketing to the Test, will include live reviews of websites that will help you learn how to optimize the performance of your website and grow your digital marketing funnels. Then on October 25th, Vistage Chief Research Officer Joe Galvin and myself will share the findings from our latest report, Decision Factors for 2019 and Beyond. And finally, on November 1st, Stephen King, no, not that Stephen King, but a Vistage member and CPA, will share his perspective on making data-driven decisions in his presentation, KPIs, and the 4 core decisions to increase profits. You can find information about all of these at vistage.com/webinar. There's a complete list of all of our upcoming webinars, as well as links to recording of past webinars. So you'll find some of those webinars that Heather referred to on that page. And that is vistage.com/webinar. Thank you all for attending today. Really appreciate your expertise, Heather, and have a fantastic weekend.
Thanks, everyone.